All right, so we should be recording. So assalamu alaikum everyone. We're sorry that we couldn't come live to you. We're having some technical issues, but alhamdulillah, we're able to still continue the discussion and share it with you afterwards. Also, one of our speakers today, she has a few calls going on in the hospital, so she wasn't able to join us, but she might be able to join us a little bit later, inshallah. So assalamu alaikum, my name is Hasna. I'm the founder and president of the Women's Mosque of America. We are the nation's first women-led Muslim house of worship. We teach women how to give the khutbah, how to lead prayer for the first time in their lives, and we hold our services in LA. Currently, we are adjusting to the pandemic and hosting events online instead. And today we're being joined by our experts, Dr. Hadia Zarzour and Zariah Horton, who are here because we took a poll for the people who are subscribed to our newsletter, and we heard from many of you that one topic you really like for us to cover is the topic of coping with isolation and the pandemic. We know a lot of you are struggling right now, or you have people in your lives who are struggling, or children. And so we wanted to bring these experts on here to get their feedback and their advice on the best ways that you can move forward during this time. So if I can get the two of you to give a quick bio, whoever would like to go first, go ahead.
Well, I see Hadia is still on mute, so I'll go. My name is Zariah Horton, and I am a mental health professional. I've worked in mental health, probably almost 20 years regarding public mental health, working for a multiplicity of nonprofits, primarily in the Southern California area. And I have worked with special populations, in particular, so young teenage girls, as well as families and adults, as well as couples and seeking who have marital challenges. On top of that, though, I also am a big volunteer. So I volunteer in the community in a lot of social service organizations. And so I also lend my services regarding mental health and working with people. Oh, and I also forgot, I am a mental health first aid trainer. So that's how I really get to interact with the community. My primary focus is providing mental health first aid to religious spaces. So religious communities focusing on Muslim, but actually I've been to plenty of different religious spaces. So again, just big goal is destigmatizing mental health and encouraging people to be well, and however that is for them.
Great, thank you.
Assalamu alaikum, everyone. Thank you so much for having me. So I actually studied psychology, and I was so much in love with this field since I was in Syria. I was born and raised in Syria, but because of the stigma that was like more than 20 years ago, I had to have another degree in education, and I was a teacher for like 10 years. I taught psychology at different settings, and then I was able to come here about 12 years ago to Chicago and to study psychology in more depth. And I'm a licensed therapist now, and I'm a trainer focused on trauma. I've worked at different settings like schools, hospitals, residential facilities, and community mental health agencies. And most of my experience here in Chicago has been with refugee communities, refugees from different backgrounds. So I'm very happy that you're bringing attention to mental health. So thank you for that.
Alhamdulillah. And Samia, want to go ahead?
Assalamu alaikum, everyone. My name is Samia. I'm the current part-time director of operations at the Women's Mosque of America. And I'm actually also in the mental health fields myself, although in a more non-traditional way. I'm a happiness expert, and I coach and train people in how to take charge of their happiness.
Awesome. Thank you. So Samia, obviously we're not doing the live stream today, so she was going to take your questions, but we do have plenty of questions that we've prepared for our speakers. So we'll just get right to it. So for Dr. Hadia and for Zariah, what is the current landscape looking like to you? What are you seeing out there, you know, in terms of how people are dealing with the pandemic, with isolation, with everything that's going on in the news? Can you guys kind of paint the picture of what you've been observing?
Go ahead, Doctor.
Okay, so I mean, for me, actually, I've been very happy seeing people being more open about seeking mental health services. I haven't worked with as many individuals as I have recently. Like, so it's I think this is one of the blessings, I would say, that people are, because of this like kind of strange feelings. I know we're going to talk more about that, like whether it's like some anxiety symptoms or some like depression symptoms or this like discomfort. It is encouraging them to understand themselves more and to seek services. And I have to say, maybe part of it is because you know, there has been a lot of talk about mental health in the past few months. So with that, I mean, and what happens actually is what we see as they think that it's because of COVID. They're having like certain problems, but it's just like on the surface. So that's what gets me also excited, because I feel like people are kind of now encouraged to deal with problems that had been there for so long. And now that was that kind of like thing that pushed them. So I'm really hopeful about that.
That's a great point, that, you know, this time is actually a catalyst and is just bringing to the extreme whatever situation or underlying issues were already there. So yeah, inshallah, that's definitely a hopeful way to look at it. And inshallah, we hope that, you know, in doing a program like this, people can also learn of ways that they can deal with whatever issues they are dealing with already. Zariah, can you paint a picture for what you've been observing? Or I know you have some really interesting statistics about what's been going on right now.
So there's several things that I'm observing. I'm observing people be very creative in the sense of thinking of really wonderful ways to reach out to people, in the sense of cooking classes, WhatsApp. I've got like several groups going on WhatsApp to encourage people to connect. So people are thinking outside of the box. I've had book clubs online. I'm seeing book clubs online as well as cooking classes, people sharing recipes because they're cooking more at home and going out less. So there are, you know, some people are eating better than they ever have before. I have a friend who has basically got what are everybody getting? I want to call it a pressure cooker, but that's the old school name.
A slow cooker?
Yes, a slow cooker, but you know, there's the big ones that everybody's getting, and I'm blanking on what those air fryers.
Like air fryer.
Yeah, air fryers and what have you. Anyways, she had it for a year and never used it. And we were all talking about, you got this, and all of a sudden now she's like, oh, I just made this and I just made this. And this is a person who doesn't cook. So I'm just saying, like, people are acquiring. So my positive spin is people are acquiring new skills and figuring out new ways to connect to people. The other piece though is I'm also seeing that women in particular who are many times take on more duties as far as household, child responsibilities, are finding themselves taking on more and more. And so they're juggling more, and it's challenging. And so here's the thing, you already wore multiple hats. You already mom, possibly, you know, a partner, and an employee if you were working. And now you've become a teacher, you've become a nurse, full-time activity coordinator, and that's a lot of roles to be juggling. And so, and we're finding that this is, you know, it's wearing on people disproportionately because women are taking on these roles. Also, women disproportionately are single parents and head of households in that sense. So again, just being mindful of there's already a challenge of being, you know, of everybody experiencing safer at home and this pandemic, but then these extra roles. There's other like areas, not, I'm in Southern, you know, I'm in LA, where they're actually trying to get the schools to go back because parents are really, you know, really struggling trying to multitask and work jobs with, you know, as well as providing homeschool. And so just being, you know, mindful of that. And I'm also seeing people who are very isolated because they were single people. They may not have been close to their home, like family, meaning geographic is what I'm referring to. I mean, even if they were geographically pretty close to their family due to their family members being possibly vulnerable to COVID, they have stayed away for safety purposes. So again, some people whose outlet was interacting with people at work now don't have that. And if we're looking at children, for some children, speaking as an only child, but also for children who, you know, even only children, who do they interact with, who's their age? School was a wonderful way for just learning, not only learning socialization skills, but interacting with their peers. And for some people who, you know, if they socially isolated kind of as a small unit, they might not be getting that. So again, that's the other piece. And we're going to talk a little, you know, more about isolation, but that's but those are kind of a few things that I'm seeing, that people who are isolated, they're really, depending on what it is, struggling to make connection, and it can be challenging. So those are my kind of juxtapositions, the yin and the yang. People who have figured out ways to kind of, it's not perfect, but figured out ways to kind of cope. And then other people who are kind of having some challenges regarding the way, because there's so many tasks. And lastly, and I know that was a pretty long thing to say, I also want to, you know, encourage people to give themselves grace, and really give yourself grace. Really protect your peace, because I find people are like comparing themselves to other people, which is honestly never a good thing. And on top of that, comparing themselves to pre-pandemic. Well, pre-pandemic, I did blah, 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 blah. Well, pre-pandemic, you had access to a lot of things you don't have access to. So give yourself the grace to go, hey, I'm under personal strain, I'm under anxiety, I'm under just unusual circumstances. So it may not look like I may not look physically, my wallet, my resources may not look the same as they did pre-COVID. My house cleaning, my house maintenance may not look the same as pre-COVID. My hair and nails may not look the same as pre-COVID. So again, you know, giving yourself that grace to say it doesn't, and if you're doing the best you can, giving yourself the pat on the back to say, hey, I'm doing the best I can. It's not perfect, because nobody is.
Thank you for saying that. Yeah, it is really easy to, you know, look at this time and fall into the trap of comparing it to how you were doing before, which is such an unfair comparison. So how would someone know then, how would they be able to differentiate and know if they are actually suffering, if they actually do need to take greater action than they already have been, or for someone they love, what are the telltale signs that someone is suffering emotionally or mentally?
Please go ahead.
Okay, so so we all have like certain levels of stress, right? Like we all have, you know, we all feel sad, we feel anxious. The many things here we need to look at. What are the symptoms and how long we've been struggling with them and how much they're affecting the way that we're functioning. So for example, when we say, okay, I'm a person who feels like now that I'm sad, or like I feel like I just want to cry and I want to isolate myself, even when we know we're not seeing people much, but even like I'm not talking to people, I feel like I'm not having interest in doing things that I used to do. I mean, it's even when I have the symptoms, even when I have, let's say, also the worries, how negative we think about the world or about our lives. What really matters is the period of time that we're having those symptoms, and if it affects, as I said, our functionality. So let's say, like, am I able to do the homework at the time I was a student the way that I used to? Am I able to do the housework that I used to? So that's kind of like how sometimes a person themselves won't be able to tell. Sometimes people around them will be like, what's wrong? You haven't, for example, taken care of yourself for so long. I feel like you've been talking in a negative way for some time. So it's really kind of we will see it when people start talking about, like, okay, what is this life? It's not worth living. I feel I'm worthless. It's just like we need to pay attention to what people say and what they do. Sometimes even isolating themselves is them telling us something. So paying attention to any differences and how long they do it. And then there has been a lot of talk throughout those months about what are the symptoms, how do we know, as the ones that I mentioned, where it's like preoccupied with all of negativity, we feel like paralyzed, and sometimes when we're not really sure, this is the time really to ask a professional and say, okay, we have this. I have many clients, actually. I have like the parents or the siblings of clients, because the clients themselves, or people who need help, I mean, they don't come. So I have people who would call on their behalf. So yeah, I don't know if I answered the question.
Yeah, no, that's helpful. And in reaching out, we've one of the things we really like to stress at the Women's Mosque is mental health. And we have had several khatibas talk about, this is actually how you reach out to a mental health professional. What are some of the maybe stigmas or some of the obstacles that are in the way, specifically for Muslims, that you've observed? Because sometimes there can be a misunderstanding where people might say, oh, you don't need to, go see a therapist, just read the Quran. And I've been guilty of thinking things like that. I hope I've never said anything that insensitive, but yeah, we can sometimes fall into that trap. So what are some of those maybe obstacles or pushback that you've seen from Muslims, especially in regards to mental health? And actually, it looks like Sondos just joined. Let me admit her to the room. Perfect timing. So just to fill you in, we ended up having some technical issues with our live stream. So we are recording the discussion now. So it worked out perfectly. So we're glad to have you with us. Can you just give a quick bio, and then you can actually help us answer this question. We were just about to ask you questions. So perfect timing. Go ahead and introduce yourself, though.
Assalamu alaikum. My name is Sondos Kholaki. I currently serve as a healthcare chaplain and a community chaplain in Southern California. I obtained my Master of Divinity degree in Islamic chaplaincy from Bayan Islamic Graduate School, and I completed my chaplaincy training, 5 units of clinical pastoral education at a local hospital here in Southern California. I am a mother of 2 teenagers, and that has been quite a ride. Let me see what else. And I'm currently serving as Vice President of Healthcare Chaplains for the Association of Muslim Chaplains, AMC.
Okay, great. Thank you. And this question, I think, might be suited for you, first of all, but I'd love to hear from everybody. But we were just asking what some of the common pushback that you've heard from Muslims in particular when it comes to the topic of seeking mental health help, or, saying things like, you don't need to go see a professional. You already have everything you need within the Quran, things like that. So what are some common things you've heard? And how do you reconcile mental health help and Islam?
Is this for me, Hasna?
Yes, for you, okay. For everyone, but first for you, because we'd love to hear from you.
Okay, Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. So I'm within the spiritual health profession, but what I do understand from folks who are hesitant about seeing a chaplain, for example, at a hospital is a little bit about what you introduced in the question, is this idea of we have everything in our tradition that we need, you know, alhamdulillah, everything is going to be fine, which both statements are true, right? We do have all the tools that we need. Alhamdulillah, Allah has given us plenty for coping and being able to get through the trials and tribulations of this world. But then at the same time, there is a process that needs to be addressed. And there's a mentor of mine, a chaplain mentor, who calls this phenomenon emotional constipation among Muslims, that we, for whatever reason, don't feel comfortable sitting in our emotions, displaying our emotions. Maybe there's some misperception that to display grief or to display anger, for example, something that's happening, is perceived as somebody who's lacking in faith, which is so not the case at all, because we know that our beloved Prophet, peace and blessings be upon him, was a man who displayed emotion easily and quite regularly, which is something that we need to pause and take notice of, because in those times, in that culture, that was something that wasn't kind of like today, right? It wasn't something that was happening all the time. And so if he is our model for the way of being in the world, we can take from that, from his emotional intelligence as well. So I think that this idea, and I'll speak to that point, that people will think that it's a lack of faith. And there's also probably some hesitancy or misinformation around what it means to seek help from a mental health professional, but I will hand it over to the mental health professionals to expound more on that.
Sure, thank you so much for that.
Yeah, so yeah, thank you, Sondos. I mean, as you said, like there isn't a lot of information now. I mean, as I said, I've been seeing a lot of people, so alhamdulillah for COVID, like the people have been really encouraged to seek help, but we need to see more of that. People think that usually it's like more about serious mental illness, and I always say, like, it's from the name, it's mental health. It's about how we get to know ourselves more, how to understand our feelings more, and how we understand like that we're different than other people. And sometimes you have like a couple or siblings that have different personalities, and they always assume that people should behave in a certain way, and that's kind of creates conflicts and problems. So it's very important to keep talking about the idea that it's part of the human beings. Like it's very important to keep this health, or to keep psychologically strong. Another thing I would say that people really worry about is the idea of confidentiality. That's another thing, especially if you're in the same community. People will be like, no, I don't want other people to know about my problems. So it's really difficult. I mean, a lot of times, like people that I see are like from different communities, not from my own community in Chicago. And you know, the third thing would be, as Sondos said, like the idea that, you know, there's this conflict, or we think that if we seek like mental health support, that means there's something wrong with our faith. So although again, like we know that we always say it's like physical health, you know, even in our religion, if we have something, if someone has like cancer or has diabetes, high blood pressure, we wouldn't tell them just, you know, make dua and things will be great. I mean, we so much believe in dua, but we know that we are responsible to seek out any kind of support that we can. So it's the same exact way that we see doctors, and we say, okay, we seek try to seek the best treatment. At the same time, we make a lot of dua, and we turn to Allah. Same thing with any psychological problem that we face. So I think it's very important that we keep it simple for people. I mean, even for me, like I learned sometimes, like I wouldn't, for example, say that I'm specialized in trauma. I see that people, it kind of pushes them away, and they feel like, oh my God, this is really serious. Sometimes I say, like, you know, yeah, I'm feelings doctor, or like kind of, I try to joke to them about it, not necessarily giving them any title because that can confuse them. I would just say, I'm hoping that I live to the time that we have those calls from clinics when they say, when was the last time you had your well-being checkup or psychological checkup? And the only way that we can like have it as we have it from like physical doctors is by keep like, you know, this talk going. And even when, if I go to therapists that I say, okay, this was my experience, this, because that's another thing. Like some people do go to therapists, but they feel still that they're embarrassed to talk about it as if there is something really wrong with it.
That's such a great point just about holistic health. You know, we would never ignore our physical health and say that, you know, we're, just religion alone can, you know, improve our heart rate and all of that, like to really look at the whole human body and soul and mind, and take care of this vessel that we have been given for the sake of Allah. Zariah, did you have anything you wanted to say about that?
I totally agree with what everyone else has said. I will also add that I think that there can also be like cultural mistrust of mental health, and that, you know, besides the weakness of faith, which I totally agree, people do believe that, but I also think that people are and what I'm going to say is constantly I'm going to use the word trauma in the sense of people are so used to depending on what your background, cultural, ethnic background, or what you've experienced, that's normal. So, you know, what is the reason you need to go see someone about it? Because I didn't see anybody, grandma didn't see anybody, like those type of cultural norms as well, that basically continue to allow for this kind of generational stress and generational trauma that many times we don't know, you know, we're thinking causes other physical problems. Also shame and stigma, you know, physical health issues many times are one of the reasons why people present and they're what we call psychosomatic complaints, is they're having physical problems that actually are manifestation of their mental health challenges. And it's due to shame and stigma that people will be like, oh, it's okay for me to say I have a stomach ache, I have a headache, I have insomnia, which can all be symptoms of multiple different things. But for me to say that I have that because I may be experiencing depression, they can't, you know, we can't talk about that, because that would mean also that I am physically flawed. Because that's the other piece. You know, when we come from small communities, some people come from very large communities where they can kind of, you know, no one, you know, knows them or what have you. But going back to what Dr. Hadia said regarding, you know, people worried about confidentiality, the other piece is I don't want people to know that someone in my household has a problem, because if so-and-so's depressed, or if so-and-so's been diagnosed with bipolar disorder, then no one's going to want to marry into my family, because they're going to think we all got problems, you know, mental health problems. And there's a very different stigmatization regarding someone saying, well, we all have high blood pressure and bad teeth. I mean, you know what I'm saying? Like, that seems to be okay. Like, you know, everybody's short. I mean, you know, and I'm not minimizing it. I'm just pointing that out, that how we can gloss over that and be like, oh, okay, well, that's fine, you know, but don't anybody mention, you know, that they have this, that's a mental health challenge. And that's kind of one of the reasons why we want people to share, you know, it's like sharing their status, because to normalize it, just like I'm proud to be, you know, if somebody mentions, I'm proud to be this, you know, I have asthma. Lots of people have asthma. No one's going to be like, oh, I'm not going to marry you because you have asthma. But, you know, if I were to say, oh, well, you know, I also have been diagnosed with chronic depression, and just put it out there like that, there's a different judgment regarding that. So I think that's also the piece that we kind of have to circle around. And I would also say spiritually, you know, for me, when I'm spiritually in tune, many times I actually emotionally can handle, I feel like it's a yin and the yang type of thing. Sometimes I can actually do better when, and my spirituality can provide me with the hope. So if I got some tools coping strategies from a mental health professional, and then I kind of mix that with my spiritual practices, actually, sometimes I feel better and more hopeful. And I think people feel like if I get tips from a mental health professional, I then can't practice my spirituality. Like, they're not diametrically opposed. They can actually enhance each other. And I think sometimes we miss that piece. We feel like it's either all or nothing. No, we are multifaceted people, and we can, nothing stop us from praying, zikr, wudu, reading Quran, there's nothing to stop that. As well as, hey, I go to a therapist and I attend a support group. Like, they're not diametrically opposed.
I think that's
go ahead, Dr.
I just want to say something about this point, Zariah, that people don't know that we always ask about their faith and their religious practices, and if they're spiritual or not. In all of the places that I worked at, in the assessment, we always have this question. I mean, even for me, as I said, when I did psychology back in Syria, like more than 20 years ago, we thought that was the time when there was like this divorce between psychology and religion. While when I came to Chicago in 2009, they told us, if you have a client who has faith, then you're halfway through the treatment. And I always tell that to my clients, and they feel like, wow, and so when people know that we ask about that, and actually it helps us, because they are introducing us to the tools that would help them. So it's like, for us, it's like organizing all of that they have, and trying to help them utilize the things that they already have in order to feel better.
That's interesting. I had no idea that, it was that religion and faith were recognized by the mental health field in such a powerful way.
Yeah. It's considered a tool of resilience.
Wow.
Resiliency is really important. And if you've already have a faith tradition that talks about resiliency, that's huge, versus not having any type of kind of foundation of resiliency, of hope, of, I can help myself, or, support in that sense.
That's beautiful. I remember once, Zariah, talking to you, and you were telling me why you're passionate about getting children, catching mental health issues early on in children, because you said, and I don't want to misquote you, but I think you said something like, every one of the adults that comes into your practice, they've been suffering since they were children. And if someone had helped them as a child, that would have been a lifetime that they could have not been suffering. And so why don't we talk a little bit now about children during the pandemic, because obviously, this has been in the news that the majority of them are, not going to school in person anymore. They're either doing it via video chat or other, sort of hybrid models. So maybe Sondos, you can talk about this, since you do have children. What have you observed going on with children, the particular struggles that they're facing right now, and what are some ways that we can help them?
You're on mute, Sondos.
You're muted.
Yes, I'm still getting my wits about me. I have a 12-year-old, almost 13-year-old, and a 14-year-old. And it's very interesting, boy and a girl, and they both coped with it very differently. So you can imagine two kids brought up in the same household, same parents, and yet their personalities kind of paved a different way forward for them. My son struggled a lot. The 14-year-old who is starting high school, I noticed that COVID, hit in March, they continued online in school. He had summer school. The minute summer school finished, and there was like a 6-week lag where he didn't have anything going on. He's a very active boy. He loves to work out. He goes running. He does, lifting weights and all of that, basketball. That started to decrease. And he just started getting more lethargic, starting spending more time on his laptop. And I was, I was kind of watching, and then like maybe a week into it, I'm like, I noticed that you're not moving around, you're not doing it. He's like, Mom, I don't know, I don't feel like I have any energy. I don't feel like I have any motivation. It's just not fun anymore. Because also his friends, parents were not allowing, the kids to get together. The basketball courts were shut down. So it seemed like any outlet for him was kind of getting blocked, and he was doing everything alone. And so he, I've never seen that before in him. He was just really down, really didn't have any motivation or energy to do anything. And I felt like kids not only need structure, but we all as human beings, we also need purpose. We need to wake up every day feeling like we've got something to do. We're accomplishing something. And it's not also just about doing, but the doing also spends on our being, subhanAllah. And so we worked out a plan where we could actually get him a job, quote unquote, because he was only 14 years old, or he's only 14 years old rather, just to get him out there at a family member's store. And he spent maybe 3 to 4 hours a day. But it was amazing to see the difference that it made, to have him wake up and feel like, I'm going to work today, right? I have something to contribute. I think innately we are wired to serve and to be productive, to have this contribution towards society. And so subhanAllah, that completely turned it around. But even today, so he went back to school yesterday, to high school in person. And even this morning, we were sitting down next to each other working, and he's like, Mom, there are no fun things to do. There are no activities at school. We just go and we learn and we come home. And I was like, yeah, it sucks. It's not a fun time. It's like, I hope it's going to be over soon. So keeping those lines of communication were really helpful, and just kind of watching and knowing your child. And then really quickly, my daughter is very social, and she has a great social life, mashallah. And so she keeps up with all her friends on the phone and talks to them. And she wasn't as affected, subhanAllah, because she was able to keep those communication lines open. I'm trying to think if there were any negative effects. I think that she did okay. I really just, I think I struggled with my son a little bit more. So that's my personal experience, kind of watching and realizing kind of the different things, but we'll see how the rest of the year plays out. I think what I did is I also set expectations for them that this may not be over, quote unquote, for quite a while.
Yeah, and it's so interesting too, because people have different ways of connecting with others. Sometimes it's not verbal and not through communication. Playing basketball, especially for boys, bonding together in that physical way, you can't really recreate that. So that is a very important point to make, just about everybody being different and there being different solutions. But that's an amazing solution that you guys came up with. And I know, Dr. Hadia, you wanted to talk a little bit about purpose and how, people before the pandemic were already dealing with these issues that maybe the pandemic has exacerbated, but that they can finally deal with these issues. So can you talk a little bit about how does someone find purpose if they are suffering in this way?
Yeah, when we think about emotions, like every emotion has a role or has a function. So subhanAllah, people, because I don't know, like if we can say, like mostly because of technology, I've heard a lot of people talk about loneliness or anxiety, especially with teenagers. And you see people are surrounded, that's before the pandemic, I'm saying, like you see people like living with their families and doing their roles, but still when they come to me, they say like, I'm really struggling with this loneliness. And so that's an issue as because like most of our communication has been like through those devices, and we're not really putting a lot of effort in connecting in person. And subhanAllah, even we're really thankful for this technology, because when you think about it now, we are able to talk because there's this technology. Having telehealth is a huge blessing, but it's never the same. So even with my fellow like therapists, we always say like, yeah, we are thankful, but it's never the same as meeting the clients at the office in person. There's something about this connection when we see each other, even if I'm like looking at you in the camera, but there's something about being in the presence of the other person. So So we have this problem from before. Now what's happening is that everyone is feeling it, regardless to the amount of like their phones or social media usage. What's really helpful, and I've been, you know, like, alhamdulillah, successfully doing this with every single client, is that this question of like, okay, how do you perceive what's happening now? And you know, like, and this opens like a lot of conversations about this life and the purpose of this life, and with all the people, even with their initial assessments, when they said we're not considered religious or spiritual, they still said we believe there's something, there's a higher power, and there's something, so we're trying to think about what we need to do. So to summarize, like, when we, I mean, whether we think about like really any difficulty that we go through before the pandemic or now during the pandemic, if we don't get to the purpose, as Sondos said, that's the most important thing. We would just feel like, we would feel depressed. What is this life about? You know, like, we all know that we have this limited life, and we're all having different obstacles, and then we need just to sometimes those feelings of like an anxiety or depression symptoms or this loneliness, actually they're very good for us to move us to kind of look for the purpose that we have or that we can have. So some people, like even as Zariah said, like, they didn't know what to do, so they became so creative about cooking. They became so creative about reading books. They became very creative about even doing those parties. And of course, you know, purposes can be like different from person to another. A lot of people were helping others. Like, they feel like, okay, how can I help them? Now people are getting sick. How can I help my community? How can I help the elderly? So I think that's a really, and alhamdulillah, it's just a blessing to think of like, okay, since I can't control the situation, I don't know what's going to happen after 1 hour, after 5 minutes from now. Okay, so what is this life about? So this loneliness is really pushing them. I mean, when they come to therapy, they wouldn't know that this is what we're going to talk about. It's like, okay, what is this, you know? But then really, it's like looking at the bigger picture of what is this like about life about? What can we control? What can't we control? Therefore, what's the action plan? What can we do? And there's something also, I'll end with this, about this point, which is people think that they need to have certain feelings to be able to do something. So let's say, oh, I need to feel, when I'm energetic, I will go for a walk. It's like, no, it's like really pushing yourself. It's like, when I feel like it, people use this a lot. You know, I will call, for example, my mom, or I will call my grandma when I feel like it, or when I'm feeling a little bit better. The thing is, it's the opposite. It's like, okay, you need to do the action, therefore you get the feeling. And I mean, it's great if you have like, if you're so, you know, like, if you have this feeling to kind of talk to people and to connect to them. It's actually, the secret is like, when you don't feel like doing these things, push yourself. So when you feel lonely, this is when you try to think of like, who can I help so I can get less lonely? It's not the other way around.
Yeah, thank you for saying that. I have observed is sometimes people will maybe out of shame and embarrassment, or maybe out of a sense of perfectionism, feel like, I don't want to burden anyone else. I want to wait until I feel better or feel like myself before I reach out to a friend and talk to them. But really, this is what makes friendships, I think, and what deepens those connections, is that you go beyond the superficial level and you really learn to rely on one another and get to know people on a more intimate level where, you know, you might not know what they're suffering with. You know, you might think you're reaching out for your problem, but maybe they also are going through something, and the two of you exchanging and leaning on each other could really help both of you.
Could I just add? Yeah, oh, sorry. I was just going to say that both of you touched on the beauty of exercise. And I think we, you know, in talking about when Sondos gave the example of her son, and then Dr. Hadia, you talked about, you know, when I feel better, I'll go out and exercise. One of the things that we realize, I mean, that stats, you know, research shows that exercise is therapeutic. You feel better when, you know, you get those endorphins going. And, you know, you feel, and also if you walk 15 minutes, you have that sense of, I walked 15 minutes. That's a huge sense of accomplishment. So again, you feel a success. On multiple levels, exercise can provide a benefit. And I think you both hit on the fact that one of the sadnesses is for people who greatly depended on exercise, or maybe didn't even realize how much exercise influenced their life and their mental health. This has kind of been an eye-opening experience, because you mentioned the gyms are closed. If going to the gym was one of your regular things, now you've got to figure out what you can do regarding that. And also, Sondos, you hit on that sense of purpose. One of the things, we were asked to look at isolation, and one of the things that is key that many mental health professionals suggest is daily scheduling. Schedule yourself. Give yourself a sense of purpose. And you did that for your son. The more that you can say, oh, tomorrow I'm going to do blah, 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 blah. That allows, one, you have a hope for tomorrow. So if you're just ruminating in today sucked, which sometimes today sucks, you can then say, okay, what can I do tomorrow to add to my schedule? What can I learn? What can I do?
Zariah, that's so on point, because I noticed that they both have increased in asking me what's happening tomorrow. What are we doing this weekend? That's really interesting. They say it now. I'm connecting the two. They really crave that, like, okay, today didn't go the way I wanted it to, but is tomorrow going to look any better? What about the weekend? Is there something to look forward to?
Yeah. So as we say, obviously, inshallah, tomorrow will be a better day. Inshallah, the weekend will be better. So, and that's a way to kind of give that hope and build in, tools for people to self-soothe and self-help themselves regarding that. And I also, it's hard, like when you're used to being, we talked about like, prior to like going live, the importance of being outside and how, we're so safer at home has really, for many of us who like to walk and like to hike and, just even sunbathe, just sit out there and be like, look, the sun is shining. What a blessing, mashallah, that's a challenge. And, you find yourself like staying more, more indoors. So again, just reflecting on looking at building outside time, even if that's just 15 minutes, taking a lawn chair or, that you can safely, healthily distance and sitting it outside and be like, look, the blessing is the sun came up and it's a nice day in that sense. So again, also finding little pieces, little pieces of joy, little pieces of happiness in small things, because sometimes we want spectacular, like images of greatness or things or big goals. Another thing to cope with isolation is breaking down tasks into small, doable things. So I don't go outside, and I'm missing that. 5 minutes outside. We all got cell phones, set myself 5 minutes, even if I just sit on the steps, try to avoid people so I can, socially distance. That's, even if I have to sit there out there with a mask, that was 5 minutes of sunshine. So sometimes it's also just, again, small tasks. And then on top of that, looking at your schedule, I know I am a horrible journaler. So look, sometimes this is a do as I suggest, maybe not as I do. So I'm going to out myself already. I'm an awful journaler, awful. But but I am going to say for some people, it's great. So another way to check in regarding that schedule that I suggest is to have that check in. How do I feel? How do I feel after doing this activity? How do I feel at the end of the day? Writing that down, just kind of keeping, again, not a log of, negativity, but a log of just personal check-in and staying attuned. If you have people to connect with, you can share that log in. How do you guys, let's just do our daily wellness check. Another tip I'm going to suggest, because I know we're supposed to give solutions here, is, and I don't have this, but you can look it online, is Google the heart check. And one of that is each heart color has a different feeling. And if you have a little group of friends and maybe you don't all have time to talk to each other, just say, hey, I'm just doing send them this, picture. We are always sending, hopefully we're sending things to people. And this is a group of friends or an individual just checking in. You're busy, you may, but if somebody sends you back, you know, a color that's saying to you, oh, I'm concerned, you know what I mean? Then that's a time for you to say, look, can't talk to you right now, but I'm going to follow up with you in such and such, just want to connect. You would be surprised at, again, you know, because I'm speaking to that, Hasna, you mentioned a burden. Sometimes we don't want to be a burden on people. So again, this is a simple way to check in with someone without being a burden. This is also great for kids. You know, also feeling charts are great, because if you're not good at sometimes expressing yourself, you know, colors, feelings can be helpful in doing that. So again, just throwing out, I know that was like multiple solutions, but I'm just kind of trying to throw out whatever resonates or sticks with our audience, you know, use that. You know, but that's another way to kind of help with isolation, connect with others, or connect with yourself. You know, sometimes just looking out, if you had kind of, you thought about the day kind of morbidly, and then you're like, wait a minute though, I accomplished this task, I accomplished this task, I sat outside for 5 minutes, and I circled the parking lot another 5 minutes. That's more than I did yesterday. Awesome, 10 for me. It might be just as simple as that. You're not talking to anybody, nobody knows you did it, but you know you did it. And so maybe that, if you're a person who's living alone, that's maybe how you uplift yourself. If you have people to join you, you're socially, you know, healthily distancing and safer at home with 2 or 3, you know, people, or a helpful pet, then, you know, you can take them out there with you, if, you know, and that may be, again, a way to interact that's out of the same space that you've been interacting, because that's also another piece. Change of scenery can be very helpful as well. You know, so I will stop at that, but, you know, hopefully that's some solutions that someone could utilize.
Yeah, thank you. And it's such an important point you made about, you know, I think as Muslims, we're trained to be grateful to God. I think a lot of times, especially for women, we suffer from blameworthy modesty, where we're so trained to be humble and modest that we don't even want to look at anything good that we've done at all. And I think in times like this, what you said about taking account of, these are all the achievements I accomplished, and to feel good about that, not try to hide it from yourself, but to really celebrate that, I think is very helpful. So thank you for all of those great tips.
And simple things like taking a shower. I don't mean to be like funny or haha. I'm not laughing at that. I'm serious when I say you're at home and you're just like, I took a shower today, I put on lipstick. Great. Like, make it small increments that are doable. Because sometimes we don't even give we have to have these grand gestures. Not everything's a grand gesture, but it's a gesture of self-love and self-care. So it's a grand gesture internally, you know, and externally. Sometimes we forget those things.
Beautiful. Sondos, do you have any advice, or how would you differentiate really from spiritual health versus emotional health? And what advice would you give spiritually in these times?
That's a great question. I think we touched upon it a little bit in our discussion here, but what Dr. Hadia was saying about emotions being like Allah's gift to us in order for us to pay more attention to what's going on in our bodies. So we talk about the interconnectivity between mind, body, and soul. And so if something's going on with us emotionally, cognitively, it's going to affect us spiritually. And then and vice versa, the other way around. So when we emotional health, when we're tending to our emotions, or when we feel particular emotions surfacing within us, I say the spirituality is a recognition or acknowledgement that there's something bigger out there, something bigger than just ourselves, and that could be divine source. It could be named different things with different people, but the way I see it and the connection there is that spirituality.
Code blue.
To leave in a couple minutes.
You have to go for that?
Crazy day. I will end with this and just say that spirituality is, research has shown that spirituality and somebody having a faith tradition or some kind of faith structure, spiritual structure, is the top coping mechanism. for dealing with emotions. So I think Dr. Hadia touched upon this beautifully. If when we feel that emotionally something is off, many times people, what they do is they lean into their spirituality in order to address what's coming up for them. So spirituality then becomes the channel by which we begin to address what's going on with us emotionally. It can be. SubhanAllah, we talk about the tools that are within our tradition, right? If we just take prayer, like when something is coming up for us and we're feeling angry, I'll jump to this. When we're feeling angry, our Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, gave us tricks and tips of what to do when we're feeling angry, right? And that we redo our ablution, we redo our wudu. If we're standing, we sit down. If we're sitting down, we lie down. Take deep breaths. Revisit our intentions. And what I was saying about prayer is that prayer is such a beautiful tool. So I'm doing this, at the hospital. When I go in to see a patient, what they're giving me is emotion. Then we talk about, okay, how does this impact your faith, and what role does spirituality, play in your life? And when I realize, or I try and understand what way that manifests for them in their life, then what I do is I kind of translate the emotion into prayer. So when we end the visit, it's like we take everything that they've been carrying, that burden, the anger, the sadness, the fear, the anxiety, anxiousness, whatever it might be, the grief. And then we take that and we say, like, we lift it back up to Allah. Like, we give it right back to the source. And one of my shuyukh, when I went to him with a burden of my own, he said the same thing. He said something so beautiful, and I'm probably going to mess it up now. But he said, give it back to the one who essentially gave it to you, right? And so, I can go on and on, but what I like to say, that spirituality is then the channel by which we deal with or address our emotions. And that could be the two. In terms of practical advice for our spiritual health, what I like to say is find your spiritual love language. Each one of us has a different way that we connect to Allah, and our beautiful tradition of Islam gives us many different ways to connect. One for every single person out there in the world. For some, it might be the Quran. For some, it might be just silent khadwa or meditation retreat from people. Others, it might be nature, we talked about. Others, it might be the structure of salah, of the ritual prayer, and on and on. So during this time, I think it's a really great moment to step back, because we're not distracted by everything that we're usually distracted by, and get to know yourself. So there's a beautiful saying in our tradition, he who knows himself knows his Lord, or she who knows herself knows her Lord. And I think that speaks to this idea of when we know ourselves and we know what nourishes us spiritually, what nourishes our heart, then we can use that to better connect to the Lord of the worlds. And I found that, in this past Ramadan, the one that was in quarantine, over and over again, I heard people say that was the best Ramadan that I've had. Of course, there were some, for obvious reasons, we were struggling, we lacked community. For other people, it was really a moment to immerse themselves in the essence of the month, which is solitude, reflection, slowing down, taking a break, being awake at night, doing the prayers, those kinds of things. And I think that there's a secret there. There's a reason why so many people thought that this past Ramadan was one of the most meaningful, right? Maybe it wasn't the best, like, let's not put that label on, but it was one that was very meaningful. And then I will end with this in saying, how many of us have thought about God more since March? How many of us have thought about our religious beliefs and our spiritual truths in the year of 2020? And why is that? And what is the connection there? We are challenged in life, and this world is the abode of trial and test and tribulation, right? How does that nudge us back towards our Lord, and in what different ways? And so getting to know ourselves, getting to know our spiritual love language, and beginning to maybe relearn how to speak that language or becoming more proficient in that language, I should say, is something that can be a beautiful practice, starting from now and then hopefully moving into the next decades, inshallah. And I'm so sorry, I apologize, but I need to excuse myself.
Yeah, thank you so much. We know you're really busy, so thank you for taking this time to be with us.
Thank you so much for having me. It was an honor to be among my panelists, and I'm sad that I don't get to spend more time with you all, but sending you all of my love and my blessings and my prayers for health and success and ease, inshallah, and may this pass smoothly and quickly, inshallah.
Ameen.
Assalamu alaikum, everybody.
Walaikum salam. Thank you.
Going off of what she just said, you know, about this being a time where we are kind of taking account and starting off or building a new foundation for life. We are also in many ways doing this as a society. And, you know, with all of the news that's been, you know, blasting over the past few months, there's been a lot going on from, you know, the pandemic to climate change issues to all of the tragedies within the Black Lives Matter movement. And, you know, Zariah, I see in your background, you have Breonna Taylor's name because of the recent verdict or her, the people who murdered her going free. What would you say specifically to Black Muslims who are on top of everything that is going on, are also having to watch, because as we know, these issues have been going on for forever, but now just being bombarded on a daily basis with watching this violence, watching the backlash and the insensitivity on the other side for people who don't want to acknowledge the violence. What advice do you have to Black Muslims who might be suffering, you know, in compound ways?
So this has been really challenging. I mean, this is a challenging time on multiple levels, but just, you know, we're in a pandemic. But on top of that, and I think this speaks to the challenges that I am Black, so I'm going to speak to that. And I'm sure other people are experiencing all kinds of challenges as well. But I'm really going to speak to the fact that life is challenging as is. And being a Black person in the United States of America, there's subtle microaggressions that take place all the time that we're not even, that we just kind of got to go through, because that's life and that's how we have to stay afloat in this, you know, in the, where we live. So now to constantly see that even bigger, and basically we see kind of the, what do I want to say, almost on a regular basis, images of the fact that my life does not matter. My people's life or people who look like my family do not matter. People can get away with murdering them because what, they do not matter. So I am non-valuable. And on top of that, we are disproportionately being dying of COVID, so of the coronavirus. We are disproportionately essential workers. We are disproportionately, due to the fact that the unemployment rate in the Black community is higher, is always twice as much as the general population. That's a given and has been a given. So these are things like, you know, going back to, this is what's happening, and now it's always happened, and now we have to kind of see it in our face. So it's a struggle, and that's where, you know, I will say, regardless of if you're, what your faith tradition is, I think in general, Black people are faithful people. And honestly, that's been, you know, a strong piece of our community of how we've had to cope to get through, because we didn't have other resources to get through regarding that. But I would also say that we have to be conscious of what's happening and those images. And so I would encourage the limitation of those images. Because, you know, many of us, if you've experienced that in your personal life and now you're seeing it over and over by watching, I have to say, George Floyd, that I think I was okay. And when I speak to my friends and family, it was bad, but I think that one put me over the top. I think the Breonna Taylor is like, sadly, this piece that is just making me want to, I'm really struggling. Like, for her story is like, I thought it was bad, but now I thought it couldn't get any worse, if that makes sense, but it is for me. And maybe that's how, maybe I'm resonating as Black female, but it's challenging. So I want to say this. Some of the resources that I'm going to throw out, because I think it's valuable, is Dr. Rahida Walker has this book called Unapologetic Guide to Black Mental Health. And I think that's, reaching out to resources. There's some apps that I also want to throw out as well that I think are helpful. There's also another doctor, and I'll find it in one of my resources, that also has something on Black mental health wellness. And I think, one, culturally speaking, so Black and Muslim, that's definitely, you're not going to go get mental health. Generally speaking, I know I'm making a gross generalization, but I'm going to say Muslim, you're not going to get help. 2, you're Black, white people go get therapy, not you. And that's kind of been, an underlying message, communal message, rich people go get therapy. We ain't rich, we not going to therapy. Like, things like that, these are kind of like things that you will hear. Or life has always been like that. Why do you need extra help? Kind of thing. And nobody says it in those, I'm using language that's very clear. Like, no one needs extra help. That's not actually the lovely way that the person would say it, but that's basically what they're saying. And so again, I go back to, many of the strategies, which, I can talk about, but limiting your access, focusing on small tasks, connecting with family and friends. And I'm also going to say this, if you are an ally to the BLM movement or Black people, I would then say, please don't ask them to tell their story. Just assume they have a story. Just assume they do. And just say, I'm here, I'm supportive. You know what I mean? One of the other things that you can possibly do is, be supportive and state, you're supportive. Also, I always say, I've read so many books like The Anti-Racist, White Fragility, like these have really, one of the things I also say is get educated. People think they're woke when they're really not woke. Like, I've had people walk up to me like, I'm woke, I got you, girl. I'm thinking to myself, the fact that you're like rolling up to tell me you're woke probably means you're really not that woke. Like, that type of thing. Just be woke and keep it moving. Like, you don't have to and again, in White Fragility, that's kind of what comes across. Like, I got to tell you this, people, Black person, I got to tell you. No, you don't. You don't have to tell me. Let your actions speak for that. Let you support Black people, Black causes. Let, when people say certain things to you, you correct them. You reframe the conversation. So that's all. And also, I will also throw out this to the Black woman. There's this myth of the Black woman, superwoman. I've got to carry it and do it all. And, going back to my previous statement of pre-COVID, current COVID, living in COVID, that myth of, doing it all, no one can do it all. So, if there's a few things you can do well, then do that well. But again, I go back to giving yourself grace to not have to do everything perfect. Also reaching out to people, because there's also that type of stigmatization is, I don't want to be perceived as weak. I don't want to be perceived as unstable when we are dealing in something, even, our ancestors had to deal with a whole bunch of stuff. But, and I'm not negating that. I'm also saying though, not many of us have lived through pandemics. Okay. You know what I mean? And so that's just a layer on, that is new. And so don't minimize yourself and be like, oh, but my mom lived through Jim Crow. She did, but that doesn't mean minimize living through, this pandemic. And I think that's sometimes what we do also is we negate our feelings because we want to be like, well, and that's again, comparing ourselves. So just being mindful of that comparison, and get things that support you. Go out. There's a lot of positive social media regarding Black people getting support. And I think that's helpful. Whether it's on, I have mixed feelings about social media because sometimes I'm overwhelmed with it. So any of you who are my social media friends, you may be sending me messages and what have you, and I may not be looking at them just because I'm trying to give myself grace and keep my own peace by not being overwhelmed by, because sometimes you can't unsee what you see. Right. And that's also what I want to be mindful of, is that I'm seeing things that, sometimes I don't want to see because I'm just not in the headspace. So to avoid that, I'm minimizing that. So I'm going to leave it at that, and I'm going to also find that other hashtag that other site that I also wanted to point out regarding Black mental health. So I'll look for that. But I also want to say this: I do have, and maybe we can. I'm not sure if we can put some links to some websites or what have you, because there are. I don't want money to also be a way, for people to say, hey, I don't have it, so I can't get the support I need, because there are now more than ever, more stuff cropping up to provide people with support that is either, low. Some is no cost, some is low cost, but I want to point that out as well. Like looking at Dr. Rahita Walker's Instagram, that's free. Where she answers questions on Black mental health. That's free. So that's what I'm saying when I point that out. But let me look for this other app that I also want to share with you all.
Dr. Hadia, what would you say to people who maybe feel like to avoid watching the news or to avoid finding out about everything that's going on, that's somehow being insensitive or or not caring, or kind of sticking your head in the sand? How do you find that balance, and what would you say to those people?
I mean, people who are saying don't watch the news, you mean?
People who resist the idea of limiting the news. People who are like, I need to know what's going on.
So well, I mean, going back to that point of how much we understand ourselves or reactions or self-awareness, if I see that, if I start having nightmares and I'm not being able to sleep, or my sleep is interrupted many times because of the news, then I think it's time to limit watching it. I mean, unfortunately, some people, even when they know that, they keep on doing it. But I would say even if we're not, for the news that has to do with anything, not only the pandemic, as we said, like any videos, any that might re-traumatize the person, I would say it is important to know the facts, but if that would affect your ability to move on or to do what you're supposed to be doing, then this is unhealthy. And usually, again, it's really kind of I mean, sometimes we don't need to know all the details. So for people who want really to watch, I would say, like, how is that helpful? Again, if this will affect me psychologically, or sometimes even physically, like, some people have a lot of headaches, some people have stomachache because of what they watch. And as I said, I worked with refugees, and I know a lot of people who were so obsessed with watching the news, with watching every single video. I couldn't watch the video of George Floyd, for example. I tried many times, but then again, being like Syrian and with all my background and the videos that I've seen, I was like, why would I do that? Because it will affect me. The point is, what can I do to help bring justice? And going off from Zariah's point, I think she brought very important points about what we can do and having the resources. And again, we can connect that to the idea of loneliness and the idea of purpose in life, because, and subhanAllah, this is all part of our religion. When we think about this, we know we're not going to be here forever. We have this afterlife. And what really matters is how we bring justice to people who don't have it. And so there are always a lot of things that we can do. We start with our, you know, families, neighborhoods, and then, you know, like we go further and further. So I guess like even for our children, when we think about, we can be like a huge like role models to them of like, okay, instead of thinking like only about myself, I think about like, okay, how can I improve my community? What's really needed? And what, you know, with the resources that Zariah is talking about, like we kind of bring it, we make it simple for people, because I see a lot of people who would like to help, but sometimes they say, I'm so overwhelmed, I don't know where to start. I mean, it happened a lot with the people with the refugees. They would say, if you tell them, oh my God, half of the Syrian population are refugees now, they'll be like, where can I start? Versus like, okay, there's this family in your neighborhood who you might be able to help. The same thing I remember in Chicago, we had a list of like neighborhoods or like stores where they were, you know, they were damaged, and I have a friend who was organized cleaning those streets and cleaning after the protesting for George Floyd. So how is this connected to our psychological well-being? We are wired to feel happiness when we help others. And when we know that, even if some people resisted and say, no, I can't do anything. Actually, no, when you start helping other people, you can ask every single person who helped or volunteered, and they will tell you there's this happiness that I feel when I'm serving that I can't really explain, and I can't really, I have to keep doing it. And this actually makes us, not only we're doing something for others, so it's making us happy, it's also making us grateful for the things that we already have. So subhanAllah, and it's all in our deen. All of this is all part of our deen. So we just need to really follow and have this action plan and really do things. And we know that we're gonna die. And subhanAllah, the problems they're not gonna be solved. It's very sad when you think about what we see in this world and all the disasters and tragedies. But again, going back, that Allah knows all of that. Allah wants to see what we're gonna do. And there is a day of judgment, and inshallah we're all gonna get what we're not to really feel pessimistic, really to feel like kind of optimistic that this will give us the motivation that I do what I'm supposed to do, and then it's all in Allah's hands. Back to the idea of the control, that we don't control anything. We just need to work in the circumstances that we have and with the resources that we have.
Yeah, a common theme that I've been hearing throughout this discussion is just taking small steps. Small actionable steps. So why don't we close with what is one thing you want people to know, if there's one message you want to get out there, and then also what is something that is currently giving you hope about this moment?
Can I just add that I found the website that I was talking about, and I just want to say it's Therapy for Black Girls, and I also want to say that finding a therapist, if you can, who mirrors you can be helpful. So there's also blackfemaletherapist.com. So just putting that out there. And also saying, historically, just because something has been done by your ancestors or your family doesn't mean it was the best. And sometimes we need to shake up tradition and chart our own path. I will also say this, as a person who believes in hope and as a person of faith, the other thing that can be challenging is when you want to believe that things that happen to you are not going to happen to your children, yet they are happening. And that's what I mean when I'm talking about racism and sexism and, Islamophobia, those type of things that you're like hoping, that you're kind of past, society is kind of past, but knowing that future generations are still having to deal with it, that can sometimes bring a person down. And it's important to kind of talk about that as a feeling, in that. So I wanted to, just before I got off onto, closing is up, but I did want to kind of point out another resource regarding that. So I'm sorry for that part, but then I can go on regarding the question you asked. Okay, so my takeaway of hope, I think I said that earlier, is finding creative ways, creative outlets regarding, is there a new skill that you can learn, that you can incorporate into your life? Would be something that I kind of want people to, I want them to have hope. I guess that's it. And I also want them to know that their faith can be a help. And there's nothing wrong with combining spirituality and mental health. They're, you know, and intertwining that. Support yourself in the best way. Support you, support your family, and the best way that you know. And realize there is nothing inherently wrong with you because you're struggling right now. And you may have been struggling beforehand, and that's, you know, and that's life. So it's now even more imperative under these unusual circumstances to get the help that you need. And I will say this, I know telehealth isn't the best in the sense, let me back up. Telehealth is not seeing somebody in person, but I am also going to say this, you know, for all the apps out there for connecting people with mental health professionals, I'm going to say some of these individuals would not have been connected because they couldn't have gotten off work. They couldn't have brought their kids, you know, but now having a therapist come into their home, utilizing a laptop and a phone may actually help some people get the access they didn't have before. So that's also my hope piece, is that this pandemic may provide access to resources and information that previously we didn't reflect upon or we weren't going to utilize. And so I want to stick with that as a hope. And then later on, hopefully before this gets posted, there's some mental health apps I can suggest to tag along that people could possibly utilize. And lastly, if you get nothing else out of anything that I have said, you know, I'm just going to go back to what I've said in previous talks when I've been on panels at the Women's Mosque, and that is protect your peace and give yourself grace. If you have to say that as a mantra to yourself, then say it. Don't overextend yourself. You know, do not do things that make you uncomfortable to the best of your ability. If you have to parent children, if you have to be a teacher, yes, that makes you uncomfortable, but your kids got to learn. That's not what I'm talking about. But I'm saying, you know, if people are knocking on your door or asking you for things that you can't, or asking you to spend your time and you can't, or you feel uncomfortable, saying no because it's a safety risk to exposure to COVID, all of that is okay. You know, all of that is okay. So again, I go always back to protect your peace and give yourself grace. Our faith is a faith of mercy and compassion. And that means that if that is a powerful name, some of the most powerful names of God, then that means God gives that to us and we can give that to ourselves and to other people.
Beautiful.
And I will leave it at that.
Thank you. Dr. Hadia, what final words do you have, a message for everyone watching, and what is giving you hope about this current moment?
MashaAllah, Zariah, you said beautiful things. Like a piece of logistics from what you said about the apps, that there are many times people actually don't get the help that they need, even when they want it, is because they don't know how to access services. You know, so there are, you know, if you can provide, I know, for example, one app is BetterHelp, and it's affordable. And sometimes you can call and ask, you know, community mental health agencies for, I know some of them in Chicago. I'm sure there are like also many in California that provide the services for very, very like low prices. Some of them are even like for free. So that's also, you know, when people know the resources, I think they will get more motivated to get the help that they need. And sometimes it might be like one session or like a couple sessions. It's you know, it doesn't have to be like long. It really depends on what's going on. And I think many of the points were mentioned, going back to the idea that we need to be very, like, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is merciful with us, and he's like teaching us to be merciful with ourselves, and to kind of like focus on the idea of gratitude. I mean honestly, if we get out of the pandemic with and we have rewired our brain to think about things differently, I think it will be a huge gift. So what I mean by that is just the idea that to focus on what can we learn, and to focus on what's really important, subhanallah, with gratitude. And I know it's mentioned, Sundas also mentioned that, like, it makes us kind of like refocus, instead of thinking what am I losing because of this pandemic, thinking about what do I have, and just us being able to sit here. And for the people who are listening to us, that means alhamdulillah, we're privileged to some extent that we have our physical, very essential needs, and we're just here to kind of like learn more. So that by itself, I mean, the assignment that I give my clients every day is like every day to write 3 things that they're grateful for. Actually, like I got this from a teacher who said, this next day you write 3 different things. So what will happen with imagine if you're doing this for months, every day you write 3 things that are different than the day before. You're not repeating, like when people tell me, oh, family, friends, and religion, health, and you know what people like say, this is, which are great things to be grateful for, but just the idea that you're making the brain refocusing on the positive, you are rewiring the brain. So here again, to look at this period of time as an opportunity. This is how life is. We go from one challenge to another. It's never meant to be just like easy. Maybe we will feel bored if we're just sitting repeating the same thing. Let's utilize this time to understand ourselves better, to be like, you know, kind of like curious about why we're feeling in a certain way. Inshallah, once we're done, and remember, nothing really lasts. And think about other times actually that we went through difficult times, and what helped us, and what did we learn? So if we think about our lives, really, we think, oh, that's the time, that the hardship that I went through and the way that I went through it, that's what's giving me this happiness, or like this like confidence that I can go through another difficult time. So let's focus on that. And the last thing, you know, like what's really giving me hope is going back to the first point where I started, that many people, whether Muslims or non-Muslims, whether believers or not believers, this pandemic, from what I've seen in my clinic, it has been motivating them to think about the bigger picture of like, who is in control? What is this higher power? Who is God? And what is this life about? Which is, I think it's great to have for everybody. And people who have faith, they're more focused, as Sundos said, and they're trying to connect more to their creator.
Thank you. It's almost like the whole earth is getting a giant intervention right now. So all of the practices that we had, you know, someone facing an intervention is going to be like, no, life was perfect before, but actually it wasn't. You were in denial and maybe numb to the problems you had, and it is discomforting to change up your regular routines, but inshallah, we can use this time to set the record straight on every area of life, not just with race relations, but, you know, healthcare and schools and families. I mean, I one of the things I do is I tutor children after school, and I have just noticed that the ones who were acting up before, they are so happy now that they have time with their parents. Like all the children have calmed down completely. And so I would just say, you know, people just keep in mind what makes money is negative news. And so, going off of your point of just, counting your blessings and what you want to be grateful for, there is so much good that is coming out of this time right now that it's just not being reported because it doesn't make money. And inshallah, you know, I hope this was a small entry into this topic for anyone who's interested in learning more. We'll definitely be posting links and sending them out in our newsletter. And, you know, thank you both for your time, and for Sundos, who was with us from the hospital. As we know, our Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, took an entire year of grief after the passing of his beloved wife and uncle. So mourning and grief and feeling our feelings is is not something that is alien to our religion. You know, he always would cry openly in public, and when people would challenge his masculinity, he would say, actually, you know, tears are a sign of mercy from God. And so whoever doesn't have this ability to cry is cut off from that mercy. Our religion, I just want to clarify, is one that definitely embraces all emotions and honesty with our emotions. So any way that we can remove that stigma or that block between religion and mental health, we definitely want to do that, and encourage all of you to do the same, whether it's for yourselves or for your loved ones. We hope that, inshallah, this is a time of renewal and rebirth for all of you. And please reach out to us at info@womensmosque.com. If you do need resources, we will definitely connect you. Samia will be answering the emails. So thank you again to our speakers. Thank you for your time and for, you know, really speaking from the heart. And inshallah, I pray that this discussion is able to help many people who watch it. And
Thank you so much for having us.
Thank you. Assalamu alaikum.
Assalamu alaikum.